So you guys had your reading over the holiday, or to get an idea. The purpose of that had a lot to do with health information management, which I wish Tom was here because I know he's got a little bit more statistics, but we were doing some job analysis, and health information management, at least as the department within the hospital, is where a lot of this management of electronic record is residing. I can tell you, even in our community, where if you got paper documents that needed scanned somewhere, they might be scanned within the departments themselves. So ER, the ambulance record, the report the ambulance staff does, they give it to the secretary in the ER, and she would scan it into the electronic record in the ER. Those kinds of things are being shifted all to medical records, with even some of the securities, particularly with students, with guests that are coming into the facility to do like research. The IT department may be the one that actually builds the login for the person, but health information management, that is a department, is the one, or is the department that's granting that access. That's the department that people are having to go through to request the kind of access that they need, where historically that's been just through the IT department. So keeping that in mind, that if you see jobs in health information management, or this is an area you're looking at, I know people think of it as records filing and being like a clerk, and there's a lot more to it now with managing the electronic record. And as we move forward with that, we're talking about the adoption of it. So we've talked about what informatics are. We've talked about building forms and managing a database, and those forms translate into the usability of adoption. If we don't have a good way to enter things from some of those other lectures, remember they had errors. They took out the $1 million system in one hospital because it had so many screens to go to because it just wasn't built right. So there's lots of reasons why there might be issues with adoption. And this lecture is going to mostly focus on the human component of it. There's always resources, there's always costs, there's infrastructure. Those are all reasons why there may be adoption issues, but we're going to focus on it at the level of the person and how strategically some tips and tools to get everyone on board. So the objectives today, we're going to identify the frequently encountered challenges, propose some solutions, and look at how some tools that can be used to design some plans to help with that adoption. So when we talk about that system that they took out of the other hospital, the millions of dollars they spent, we need to go back and look, why did the systems fail? One of the big adoption issues with clinical staff, in addition to usability, is it doesn't look like what they're currently used to seeing. So when a physician comes in and they spend some time with you, if you go in for, say, a regular checkup of some sort, say you go in for a cold, and you've had a cough and a cold. When they examine you and they do what they need to do, they come back out and they'll say, Carrie's a 35-year-old female who presented today with a complaint of cough and green goo, more technical than that, and they go through it, right? It's been ongoing for 3 days. She has a history of hay fever, allergies, and asthma. She does not currently take any medications. She has no allergies to medications. On exam, her lungs are clear to auscultation and 6 fields. So they just tell the story about what's going on with the patient. And now we're asking them to start clicking in boxes. And so when they talk about this narrative, and that's the narrative, they want to tell the story. They want to say that their chest pain started because they were mowing the grass after they had just shoveled a load of gravel, and they sat down for 10 minutes and it wasn't relieved with rest. They want to tell that story, and clicking boxes, it does look different. We're challenged with that because we can sort of get a narrative, but that's one of the first things they see. If they can't read it that way because that's the way they're trained to talk, they don't want anything to do with it. They stop right there. The concern, this person Walsh in this article, the concern was that the poor communication from not having this narrative is a perception that they have, that perceived poor communication puts patients at more risk than not having the information at all. And then that comes down to that structure. What did you just do? Comes down to the structure of those forms and things that we're trying to enter the data on. How can we make it so that it flows the way they're thinking when they're trying to talk that way? So there's 3 critical success factors that kind of underline why these systems are failing. And, well, we need to build right. The first one is the user characteristics. So we just talked a little bit about their cognitive style, the way the physician thinks, the way the clinician thinks when they're taking care of the patient. And all of that comes from their culture, how they were raised, how they were trained. Physicians historically were trained to think that way. Now new physicians are being trained to think about electronic documentation. So it still follows a similar pattern. But their situation and their attitudes or expectations to that are changing as they're being taught. The hardware and software performance, you hear a lot of complaints coming out of these departments. They don't want to use electronic documentation because the system's slow. It takes too long. It's too long to log in. I have to remember too many logins. So that's all system design. I am feeling 13th right now. Just telling you. One more thing happens, we're just going to go sit in the sunshine. Organizational characteristics then is the culture of that whole organization. So do we have leadership on board? If the physicians aren't wanting to participate, or you have a particular department that isn't quite coming on board with the idea of this electronic record, is there somebody at the top that's helping to drive that, holding these people accountable? So those are the 3 big things that can drive a success factor. And the WIIFM, if you haven't heard of, what's in it for me? So when we talk to these people, when we come across these challenges with this adoption, we want to be able to talk to them about what's in it for them. And so you have to know that audience. The physician wants to be efficient and provide good patient care. The nursing staff wants to be efficient and provide good patient care. But they also, when we talk about efficiency, it's just not how fast they can get it done. It's can they have quality time with their patient. And if they feel like they're being tied to a computer or an electronic device, then they feel like they're not having time with their patient to do the things that, the reasons why they went into healthcare in the first place. Free text. So you hear me talk all the time about we've got these structured fields, we've got our checkboxes, we've got our lists when we're developing these forms in any kind of electronic documentation or any kind of system. So whether it's the overall clinical information system, whether it's the lab information system. And they want to be able to put in these free text notes back to that narrative. Whether free text being that they're actually physically typing fingers to a keyboard, or free text because they're talking on something like Dragon Nuance. With voice recognition software, it's still the computer that is typing it in for them. But free text isn't really free. The actual costs incurred from free text, and this was coming from the ONC, stuff in some research that they had done, whether it was reading handwriting, which of course is the dictating or typing, at least that part's cleared up, but understanding it, extracting quality measures, the time spent maybe to train the voice recognition, you just, in the sense that it makes, a lot of times if you read the reading that I had assigned and they talked about your SOAP note, you have your subjective and your objective, and it goes through that pattern, they talk, it brings you to the point of where clinicians will historically say things like a patient had a good day. Well, what does that really mean? Contextually, if we've got some other qualifying data to go with it, they walked farther today than they did yesterday. A stroke patient's moving more on one side of their body than they did historically. They had a good day. But again, it's garbage that somebody as an analyst has to dig through to get to the meaning of what was going on. But when you have a structured text, it's easier to get to the data that's going to help promote the care of the patient. It's a lot easier to say the patient moved their arm 14 degrees more, or was able to move their arm and touch their nose today. Yesterday they couldn't move and touch it at all, in some form of a structured text than who they had a good day. Because I don't have anything to qualify it against if the next day they were able to move their arm further or less. I have to have some kind of reference. So an example back to how we're designing these things. This is just one example how one person's name, all of the different ways it can be entered, whether it appears on, and I can tell you, every company out there that provides you with some form of identification does it differently. The Medicaid cards have the spouse's name on, Medicare cards have the spouse's name on them instead of the patient you're actually taking care of. The driver's license puts the name on there that the person put on there, but the Social Security card has their first initial and then their middle name because that's how they're registered on the birth certificate. Whatever it is, we need to be able to design it for our data inputs to work for the end user. So you're the registration person, and in this example, we have to find that person because that's one of our first 5 rights in just about anything we do in clinical healthcare, identifying the patient. We want to make sure we have the right patient. We usually have to have 2 forms of identification. So how are we going to be able to enter that name? We have to program the system so if somebody enters it in all lowercase, it can be recognized. If they entered it in all caps, it can be recognized. If they started with the first initial capitalized, we can recognize it. And all of that programming is what's residing in the background and the fields. And is there anything we can do instead of trying to make the program handle these 30 different ways to enter the name? Is there somehow we can structure that form that encourages them to put it in a certain way? Maybe we only have to account for half of these ways they may be able to enter. So we used this slide before, but it goes back to what we're calling the primary effect. When we're doing this adoption and transformation, one of the things to take into account is how we present the information to the person. Clinicians often are impatient because they've got something else they've got to get to their next patient. Every moment they spend away from patient care is a dollar lost for them. That's not how they get paid to sit in a class. So we're trying to do a presentation describing them what's going to happen with the EMR implementation. We'll try to train them. They're going to take usually the first sentence. It's that primary effect. The first thing we tell them, the first thing they see, that's what they're going to hold on to. And so that can help a lot when we talk about adoption and how it works with HIT. With CP, with the physician order of entry, is how we can word it so that the primary effect works to our benefit instead of works against us. And if you remember from the other lecture, what did we talk about? These are the exact same paragraph, it's just the order in which the sentences appear and which one of those drugs would you have picked just looking at it. Obviously, it's going to be the one that says it's effective, right? It's naturally, you don't want the one that causes a headache, even though both of them are actually effective. And this might be kind of hard to see, and I provided some links under resources out there for the lesson today, under 4.2. The FDA did a lot of work on what they're calling Tallman lettering, and it's not a really great example, but we have a couple drugs that are basically the same except for maybe 3 or 4 letters. So they've adopted a way when the naming and labeling of the medications within electronic documentation systems on the labeling of the actual bottom of the cells where they call it Tallman. And they use capital letters, and they're taller then, the lettering is taller, to identify the difference between the two. And I apologize, I don't have a better example, but hydrolazine and hydroxyzine, for example, the difference is OXY and ALA. So those are the letters in the center of those words that have been made Tallman. They're all in capitals and they stand out to try to help identify. And there's been a lot of research on how this has actually made a huge difference. So I talked briefly a little bit more about some of the other adoptions when we talked about resources, whether that's financial resources, whether that's personnel resources, and who benefits, so what's in it for me. Even though the high-tech and NARA put out the money to try to help with covering the cost of implementing, which is why all the facilities right now in town are pushing towards getting this done because we have a deadline in order to capture all of those dollars and get reimbursed. Individuals are still out there saying the only reason that they're giving us that money is because insurance companies want to benefit from it, because Centers for Medicaid Services wants to benefit from it, not because it's benefiting myself as a clinician. So they still aren't hearing, even though the primary effect is we're going to give you money and reimburse you, it won't cost you. they aren't grasping onto that because they've already seen the negative, and it's just making their life harder to benefit somebody besides them. So we're back to the what's in it for me as a clinician. And that workflow and that culture are the two big things, really having the system designed or customized to meet the needs of individuals that are using it, and the degree of turnover in healthcare. They don't want to implement a new system because of the length of time it takes to train somebody. We've heard a rumor, there's an estimate of 21 hours or 21 days. It's 21 hours of educational training to use the EPIC system that St. Pat's is putting into place before an individual user is given their own personal login to the system. 21 hours is 3 days. 21 hours is a couple days over a 10-day period. How, when you're a new person being hired and they need you to be productive so that they have a return on investment on you to sit you down for 21 hours worth of training if there's no guarantee that you're going to stay in the area, that you're not just going to leave. And that turnover is what's made people shy away from implementing systems. So another strategy they're using is this, it's broken down in a table called the 3 T's. And again, there's a lot of information on here, and it's also in a bigger format separately. There's a link out there for you guys if anybody wants to look over it. But they've got what they're calling the team tactics and technology. And the team approach is having those people on board. So when we talked about your senior leadership, your physician champions, finding those 1 or 2 key people that can help present your message, making sure that the team as a whole has the same goals and the same information and are working towards the same thing so there's not miscommunication going on and misinformation being presented. And then the tactics, the big thing is plan, plan, plan. All of these systems we hear about, and anytime there were failures, it goes back to planning. There was something that they overlooked or they didn't give themselves enough time in the plan to work out whatever the next pieces of that plan were. So you planned time for testing, but they didn't plan enough time because they didn't think of all the scenarios that could happen. They planned for enough time for testing, but they didn't look at when they planned the testing. And so there were 2 holidays and summer vacation that came up, and so even though they had planned, in theory, enough weeks or days and hours, they didn't account for all the people that would be taking time off. So planning was the big thing in their tactics. And then the technology was not to shortchange yourself. When we talk again about financial resources, how many servers do you need? How much wire do you really need to pull? And they're finding that anytime that's been skimped on, where somebody said, if we just make it to go live, then, next fiscal year we'll put in the other server. If we just make it through go live, we just need enough stations to do whatever. The adoption factor goes down because without those servers, it was too slow. Without enough infrastructure, it took too long for pages to load, or they didn't have enough devices for people to be able to efficiently document and provide care for the patient. And that, as soon as you start that ball rolling on frustration, it just kind of gets out of control. So some more intervention strategies. This is also out there for you guys to pull up and look at better. So it's a little bit closer. Kind of reiterates the table of 3 T's, just in a little bit different format. So here I'm addressing culture, right? Some of you will learn differently. And this one breaks the interventional strategies down by the person. So the other one was kind of more of that project plan where you have the team and the technology. And this one's talking about those individual users. So the physician, I don't know how well you can see it there, finance, technical, time, which are addressed on the 3 T's, but there's also a psychological, social, organization, and those physicians those persons that are affected by those, such as the physicians, the users, the stakeholders. And being able to take tools like this and adapt them to your place of business is the purpose of these 2 forms. They're more of a tool. And they can relate to anything. It doesn't even have to be health IT. Any system that you were to implement, if you went down to the bank and were putting in a new electronic system to manage online bill pay, these same strategies can be used. One of the other things that they've looked at is design patterns. And so when you have a design pattern, they're looking back and seeing and Tom's probably more familiar with this, but the architecture of the software, when they're developing it, how they can develop it the one time to be used in these similar situations and looking for those same patterns. And in healthcare, we do a lot of the things the same way. We have a lot of checklists. When I talked about the 5 rights, we're always checking the right time, the right place, the right person, the right body part, or the right medication. We can develop that once and use that same pattern in multiple places. And if it works in one, then we can test it, we can validate it, because we can make sure that it's doing the same thing in all of those places. Some other suggestions for this adoption and transformation, again, are approaching the individual users and how they learn and their stimulation, games, open health IT labs where they can come down and practice, web-based training as opposed to classroom learning to try to meet the needs of all those different cultures and all your users. This physician, and I don't know if it's Shabbat or Shabbat, but had his 10 commandments for the clinical information systems. And if you just look through those, his point was, if you follow these in some form when you're doing your planning, and that strategic planning right from the very beginning, keep these 10 things in mind, and notice speed is everything, is on there twice, it's the first thing, it's the last thing. It will help with your adoption and transformation. Remember, it's not an IT project, it's a healthcare project where you're implementing the systems. And I think we've used this slide before too with these toolkits. So as you go on about your career, keep this in your hip pocket. If you decide to stay in health IT, there's lots of, even if those links in 10 years weren't working, those are the companies that you would want to go out to, AHRQ, HRSA, the HIMSS, that have tools in them with guides like these, the 3 T's table, the interventional, or the strategic planning one, to help you get organized going through this. How are you going to plan? It's one thing to say plan, but you don't want to miss something that you're planning again that you take into account at the summertime versus Christmas time when you're trying to do your implementation. And you can use any of these for resources as you do your assignment for this week. So in summary, it's kind of a review, why do systems fail? A lot of it has to do with that adoption, the transformation, the system design build. Those critical success factors, or 3 factors that will be listed. What some of those challenges are, the 3 T's that will help you with your implementation strategies, and then some of those toolkits for your use. Hopefully, there's a little bit of things there you can take away and use as you move forward. I think that's all I have to say about it today.
Okay, do you have any questions or anything you want to? For those of you that are IT kind of first and health professions second, you can see some of the software design factors are the same thing we look at when we release any type of or work with any type of other software system. Is that you want the controls to be kind of in the same place. You want consistency from one screen to another, and there's no surprises. I think maybe is the way to look at it. And that's once you, I think that's one of the strategies in becoming proficient in any software. Once you have a basic understanding of where things are, regardless of what package it is, you know for instance, where the print button is. It's found under the file menu. Or one of the things Microsoft did recently here was fully in their, I believe they released it in 2007 with the ribbon interface, and that threw a lot of people off. But then we adapt to that. So I think that's important when you start looking at adoption, is that they have some of those similar